Yesterday was Palm Sunday. I'm sitting outside in my yard right now, and you can see the palm tree behind me. It's the kind of palm tree that grows naturally here in Cyprus, where I live, but also in Israel, where Jesus lived. And this week, we commemorate the events in the life of Jesus leading up to the celebration of the resurrection at Easter. Palm Sunday remembers the way that Jesus entered into Jerusalem during that last week of his life, and it's called the triumphal entry. You can read about it several places in the Gospels. For example, in Matthew 21, beginning in verse 1, where Matthew writes, "As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, 'Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away.' This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. 'Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle, and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey.'" That's a quotation from Zechariah. Throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus reenacting events in the life of Israel and events in the lives of the prophets of Israel. For example, Jesus teaches in the wilderness the way that Moses did, and he feeds the people miraculously the way that God did when his people were wandering in the wilderness and God provided manna for them. He sleeps in a boat like Jonah during a storm, and then he feeds a Gentile widow miraculously the way that Elijah does. We see these events all throughout the Gospels, Jesus reenacting events in the life of Israel, but the Gospel writers give new meaning to these events by highlighting the identity of Jesus. So in those stories, Jesus doesn't only represent the prophets or represent the people, but Jesus represents Israel's God. It's Jesus himself who feeds the people miraculously. It's Jesus himself who calms the storm when Jonah was unable to do that. It's Jesus who is highlighted in these stories. So the gospel writers bring this message that Jesus fulfills the Old Testament prophets, but in a way that's unexpected, in a way that makes Jesus not just a fulfillment of prophecy. Jesus is God himself doing these things. On Palm Sunday, we commemorate the way that Jesus entered into Jerusalem the way that Old Testament prophecy said the Messiah would do. And this time of year, the palm trees, they need pruning. You have to cut these branches off of the palm trees, otherwise they will fall down and they can even blow around and get dangerous. So, but you can also prune the green ones. Here's a couple of dry ones in my yard, and the people put those palm branches down on the ground. It's kind of a red carpet, a welcome for Jesus. And Jesus is riding into the city, into Jerusalem, on a donkey. There's symbolic meaning to that. Of course, it's what Zechariah said would happen, but it's reenacting events in the life of David during his exile. And David is kind of the paradigmatic king. But there's also symbolism in the donkey itself. When a king rides into a city to conquer it, he's going to ride in on a horse with an army and with weapons. But Jesus doesn't come into Jerusalem to conquer it. Jesus comes into Jerusalem peacefully. He comes as its king. He's returning to the city that's already his. He doesn't have to come into Jerusalem to defeat the enemy, to conquer Jerusalem. He isn't the enemy of Jerusalem. He is already Jerusalem's king. So Jesus returns home to Jerusalem, and the people are putting palm branches down on the ground as if to welcome home its king. That's the symbolism of this Palm Sunday. And the crowd singing, "Hosanna, save us." It's an abbreviation for a phrase which means like save us or save us now. And it's a cry out to God to save us, that God through the Messiah is going to save his city, his people. That's what we commemorate on Palm Sunday. And in the same way that the Gospels present Jesus reenacting the events in the life of Israel and events in the life of God's prophets, as Christians, we reenact events in the life of Jesus. Of course, that's what we do when we get baptized, the way that Jesus was baptized. And our baptism is a symbolic reference to death and resurrection coming up out of the water. And we take the Lord's Supper or communion when we break the bread and drink the wine. And that's, of course, a reenacting of what Jesus did with his disciples at the Last Supper. And by doing that, we remember that Jesus died on the cross for us, but we also recognize that Jesus is there, sitting at the table with us, as he said he would be with us to the end of the age. And so we reenact these events in the life of Jesus. And when we serve the way that Jesus serves, or symbolically wash the feet of the people around us, meeting the needs of the people around us, we do that because Jesus did that, and he serves as our example. Jesus came into the city as its king, and at least some of the people, for at least some of the time, recognized that he was the king. And so they came prepared to receive him as king. And that's the significance of Palm Sunday for us. We want to be ready to have that same posture of receiving Jesus as king of this world, as king of his good creation, as king, literally, ruler of our lives. We recognize Jesus' lordship of our lives. And so Palm Sunday is this reference to that. We want to say, yes, welcome home, Jesus. This is your world. This is your life. Come on in. And we also remember that this Palm Sunday it's the kicking off of a week of commemoration that ends in the resurrection, when we look forward to celebrating what God did in Jesus, not just through his life or even through his death, but that Jesus rose from the dead, and he finally conquers sin for us so that we can place faith in Jesus and participate in his ultimate victory. But then there's also a looking forward even beyond Easter, when we realize that there is a time when everything will be made new, when God's resurrection life will be enacted literally in all of creation, when Jesus finally makes all things new, when he makes me new, when he brings ultimate justice to the world, righting all of the wrongs of the world, and turning all of the evil around ultimately for his good plan. And that's what I'm looking forward to. That's what we look forward to this week, and as Christians, we look forward to that every day. We want to welcome Jesus in our lives as King, looking forward to the time when he will make all things new.